What is going on, guys? Nick here, back with another video. Coinbase's earnings came out on February 24th, and the stock immediately saw some pretty wild after-hours action. Coinbase stock had been falling as crypto prices and transaction volume had been declining towards the end of 2021. But earnings came in at $3.32 per share versus $1.85 expected, which is about an 80% beat. Revenue also came in higher at $2.5 billion versus $1.94 billion expected. But when the earnings call ended, investors weren't feeling quite as good. And by the end of the call, the share price had actually dropped from their closing price. Coinbase expects during the first quarter of 2022, the number of monthly users and trading volume to be lower. Looking at Bitcoin trading volume, we can see that there's actually been fewer transactions going into 2022. Historically, crypto's gone through some pretty wild swings in popularity. This chart showing Bitcoin's price in log format since 2011 shows the peaks and troughs Bitcoin has seen. This chart only went up to 2021, so looking at the most up-to-date version of Bitcoin's price movement and the volume on the bottom, we can see how much interest has picked up during 2021. But all of that volume has definitely trailed off. But just because a company's product is cyclical, that doesn't necessarily mean that the company's a bad investment. Apple's been very cyclical because of the iPhone, and there's been plenty of other businesses that experience cyclical demand during the course of a year. I also want to point out that even though the current price of Bitcoin isn't that much higher than it was in 2018 by percentage, volume is still significantly higher today than in 2018. So to me, this is a good sign that crypto interest is still gaining momentum over time, even if the current price is down. So when we look at the past year of earnings reported by quarter, with the most recent earnings reported in red, we can see that this was a big beat in comparison to the estimates, and that the company is clearly still growing, just not quite as fast as we saw over the past couple of quarters. Looking into some of the key metrics that they put into their most recent earnings release might explain some of Coinbase's outperformance of the estimates. Other crypto assets as a percentage of their transaction revenue have been rising fairly quickly. In the fourth quarter of 2020, Bitcoin accounted for 44% of Coinbase's total transaction revenue. As of the most recent quarter, that's dropped to 16%, while other crypto assets have gone from 45% all the way up to 68%. One other chart that they included that I found pretty interesting is this unique monthly buying wallets versus the monthly NFT sales. I wasn't really sure how big the NFT market was until I saw this chart, and to be honest, I had expected it to have died down quite a bit over this year. But it seems like the first quarter of 2022 saw a huge increase in NFT sales. But looking further into what's driving these NFT sales, apparently there's this thing called the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and all of these celebrities in LA are buying up NFTs of this collection. Apparently this one in the middle right here is Jimmy Fallon's, which he paid $200,000 for. There's also only 10,000 of these Bored Ape Yacht Club NFTs. This NFT right here was bought by Eminem for $461,000. Apparently, the sales have been so huge for the Bored Ape Yacht Club that they've actually accounted for about 10% of the NFT transaction volume. Coinbase has yet to get itself into the NFT market, but they are working on it. They're also working on making NFTs much easier to buy. Coinbase plans to allow anybody with a Visa or MasterCard to purchase an NFT and then store that NFT in their crypto wallet. When we look at all the reported revenue and net income annually for Coinbase, we can see that Coinbase has done a pretty good job of keeping their expenses low while their business is seeing really high growth. Since their business is cyclical, I don't want to see them getting themselves in the same situation that Peloton has, where they spent all of its money during explosive growth and then ended up having to cut costs significantly, slowing down the progress of the company as they dealt with a drop in revenue. Looking at Coinbase's current forecasted earnings and profits over the next 2 years, we can see that while a drop in profits is projected, it still is up a pretty good amount from what we saw in 2019 and 2020. I do want to point out how much these forecasts have actually changed from my last video. In my last video, Coinbase had been projected to end 2021 at around $6 billion in revenue and about $2 billion in profits, and Coinbase had far exceeded these estimates. But the 2023 forecast has only seen a slight boost in revenue and is still projected about the same amount of profit. Now, I think what makes this valuation really tough is figuring out what 2024 and 2025 look like. We could look at what's happened to crypto in the past with all these boom and bust cycles, but just because something has happened in the past doesn't mean it's guaranteed to happen in the future. In this situation, it's probably just a lot easier to look at the implied valuation for Coinbase and then use that to try to figure out if it's expensive or not. So this chart shows the current earnings per share in blue with the current share price in purple, and the forward PE ratio is the yellow line. We can see that over 2022 and 2023, the current forward PE ratio is only 24. Right now, using my PE reverser tool, that's an implied growth rate of around 11%, and this seems like fairly low growth over time compared to crypto in general. So I think for Coinbase as an investment, what you need to ask yourself is, what is the future for crypto? Personally, I haven't been the biggest believer in crypto, but still I recognize how well Coinbase is running their business in this market. If crypto is here to stay, Coinbase is a fantastic investment. Also, during this most recent boom, unlike 2018, I think I've seen a lot more major companies take steps towards giving the public places to purchase with crypto. But it depends on how much the public catches on and starts to adapt to the technology. Visa did report during their most recent earnings release that there was about 1 to 2 billion in crypto purchases using the Coinbase Link credit card. So it is certainly something to watch. Now before you go, I have this great video up here for you next about PayPal, and I'm actually a little surprised that I haven't heard other people talk about what I mentioned at the end of this video explaining their most recent earnings drop. And as always, thanks for watching.